Here's your host, consultant and financial planner, Adam Koch.
All right, everybody, I'm introducing a podcast guest today who has unlocked the cheat code when it comes to accounting, CPAs, and tax work in the post-pandemic world. David Hartley is a CPA who believes the future of the CPA profession looks a lot different than the past, and he's spearheading the growth and innovation efforts at Anders CPAs and Advisors, where he leads the firm's advisory practice. If you don't know what advisory practice is, what it means, chances are your CPA is probably not doing it. That's the first thing. Second of all, you're going to learn a lot about what a really great CPA does, what advisory services are, and how they're implemented around the country these days in a post-pandemic world. And David himself is a lifelong technologist, recognized innovator, and successful business executive. He continuously shares his expertise and lessons learned with other CPAs and business owners to help them find their own success. So it goes without saying that I just drank from the fire hose of a subject matter expert and thought leader in the field. So please enjoy my conversation with David Hartley. All right, everybody, today we have David Hartley, the visionary partner in charge at Anders CPAs and Advisors, where he masterfully blends cutting-edge technology with expert CPA insights to shape the future of accounting. With a career over 3 decades and a passion for innovation, David's transforming the way businesses grow and thrive. So welcome to the show, David. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate it so much.
For sure. Now, we're going to jump right into the meat of the conversation here. And one of the things I find really interesting about you and what you're doing is that, and pardon the judgment here, but the CPA profession, I don't think is necessarily seen as a very exciting field of study, right? So
Yes.
with your extensive research and your experience, the visionary work you're doing at Anders, how do you see the profession evolving in the next, let's just say, 10 years, especially in terms of technological integration, industry standards, just how things look? How are things going to be different?
Yeah. Thanks, Adam. So actually it's a very interesting and fascinating topic for me. So as you mentioned in the intro, I've been in the CPA business for over 3 decades. I initially started in public accounting. And then I actually left the CPA profession, went and did technology. So I led technology for a public company, and then I came back to the CPA profession. So I've seen a lot over those 3 decades. And when I look for the next 10 years, I think we'll probably see as much change, if not more, in the next 10 years than I've seen in the last 30 years. And why do I think that's happening? I think that's happening for a number of issues. As you mentioned, the CPA profession, we're incredibly trusted, but we're not viewed as the most exciting, the most interesting. And as a result of that, that's putting pressure on our pipeline. So you have a whole bunch of CPAs who are retiring, who in some ways are the old guard, who have written, audit and tax services for 100 years. And then you've got this new generation of CPAs coming in, but they're fewer in number than what's going out. So we've got this pipeline issue to deal with. At the same time, sort of the concept of advisory services is not new. It's been flowing around CPA firms for a decade or so. But what's really happened in the last several years is that many firms, big and small, have gotten very serious about advisory services. And what does advisory services mean from a CPA firm? I think everybody's pretty much familiar with the traditional audit and tax services that you expect from your CPA firm. But what we started hearing a decade, 2 decades ago was that we want more from our CPA than just those services. We want you to be able to improve our business outcomes based on your expertise. And a lot of our clients, so our clients are mostly middle market, small to mid-sized businesses, and generally they're not financially oriented people. And so as a result of that, they need their CPA to do more than tell them what happened in the past, but to really focus on how can I make my business better and how can I improve my outcomes in the future by using financial data and financial acumen to make my business better. So that's one of the interesting trends that's changing. And then on top of that, then you have the technology that's coming in. And I am extremely excited about AI and how that's going to impact the profession over the next decade. But I do believe there are some significant shifts that are happening. I think I touched on some of your topics, if not all, but I'm sure we can cover the rest of those as we go through the conversation.
This is great. In fact, I was already excited about this episode anyway, but everything you just said, and we're just one question in here, I'm already pumped up. I mean, literally just had a conversation with a business owner client in Cincinnati, 2 hours south of us. I'm in Columbus, Ohio, and she is killing it. I mean, she's killing it. She's opened one office. She's got a second office open now, and it's going well. But she just feels like she's kind of spiraling, for lack of a better word, in that she's really struggling to kind of wrap her head around the business. How much am I making? What can I take home? Can I pay myself at all? Because of the circumstances specifically with this business, there's an LLC, but then one of them set up as a C corp because of a Rob's strategy that was used to fund the second branch. But this is exactly, you're 100% right. This is exactly what owners need. I think that people, when we think of non-business owners, I think that there's this false perception that owners, because they ran a business, and especially if they've been doing it successfully for a while, that they know it all, and and they're so business savvy and they understand it all. But the truth is, every owner should read the book E-Myth Revisited at the very least. And and in most cases, there's the entrepreneur, the manager, and the technical worker, right? And we can only be one or two of those people. Like for me, I'm the entrepreneur and I'm the technical worker, but I'm a terrible manager. I'm too nice. I want everybody to like me. But even if you're an entrepreneur and you have those qualities, that doesn't mean you understand finance and accounting and the things that CFOs do and accountants do to kind of help wrap your head around your company so you feel like you're in control as opposed to tail trying to wag the dog.
Yeah.
But with that being said, do you want to comment there?
That's one of the other macro trends that's happening, which is the world is becoming increasingly complex. And there is no way, like you just mentioned 3, and you want to be 2 out of the 3. Unfortunately, the reality is that there are just so many variables that are happening now, and so many areas of discipline. And it's one of those things in the world today. And I think CPAs, when you were brought up, several decades ago, you were expected to be the master of everything. On the CPA exam, you needed to know every topic, everything. But what's happened is that we just need specialization and we need this expertise. The vast majority of small to mid-sized business owners are not led by a financial person. Either you're right, they're a great entrepreneur, they're a great salesperson, they're a technical expert and they've invented a product, one of those types of things. But generally, financial acumen is not one of those things that they're really strong at. So we see a lot of people that are very smart and very successful, but they don't have the time to dig into the numbers, and they need somebody that can help them with the numbers. And that's a lot of times what more and more we're hearing from our clients, which is the past stuff is great and make sure that I do that right and minimize my tax liabilities and help me be smart as a business owner. But I need you to really help me understand what's happening in my business so that I can make the right decision going forward. And that's a lot of what our virtual CFO practice focuses on, is really weekly coaching of small to mid-sized business owners to help them make better business decisions based on financial data.
The example I used was a small, growing, very fast growing business. But wouldn't you agree that things like this are surprisingly, maybe to some, even more applicable to the larger companies that have done a miraculous job of scaling and growing, but then they're just maybe plateauing, getting stuck, and the reasons aren't so obvious?
Yeah, and I'm a big believer in the concept of maturity. So every company, every person actually is at a different level, a different stage of maturity. And a lot of the maturity models, levels 1 through 5. And then as you grow and evolve as a business, you mature to higher levels of maturity. But you're right, there are certain companies that are big and successful in one area, but they're very immature in other areas. And that's the kind of thing, like there was recently, I don't want to name the company, but there was a company that made $1 billion mistake in one of their earnings releases. They put an extra 0. And as a result of that, billions of dollars of market cap was moving around. And it's like, okay, so at this part of the business, they're really good, but there's obviously some things in the financial reporting side of the business that they're not so great at. So, those are the types of things that you do find. And it is, on one hand, I could point and say, oh, shame on them. On the other hand, that's the reality. It is way too complex to be great at everything. But you need to have, if you're a small to mid-sized business owner, you need to make sure that you have your team of experts assembled, your attorney, your CPA, your financial advisor, the people that are around you that can help you shore up the areas that are not your natural strength.
Navigating the minefield. You don't want to step on a mine and learn the hard way, right?
Absolutely.
Well, you talked about AI, and I find it extremely interesting that you can even put AI in the same sentence with anything that has CPA in the sentence. But I know I use it literally daily, multiple times a day. So in light of AI's growing influence, which is I don't know, very obvious. I think if all you have to do is open your phone, turn on the news, listen to the radio. Can you share your thoughts on how artificial intelligence is catalyzing the shift away from, the traditional billable hours, concept in the CPA field to something new and different?
Yeah, and it is. It's a very interesting topic, but it's a very expansive topic. And I think we are in the very early days of seeing what AI's impact are going to be. Because I think what happened, I think when you go back 18 months ago now, when ChatGPT came out and it really hit sort of mass awareness and mass knowledge, I think you've had a group of maybe 15 to 20% of the population that have really used ChatGPT, or whether you use Bard or whatever your tool of choice is, that have been in that space and have been working with it. But that leaves 80% who've heard about it in the media, but haven't really had a chance to play with it. Mm-hmm. And so as a result of that, it hasn't really, even though it's in your Netflix recommendations, and there's all sorts of ways that AI is starting to factor in. I think where this is really going to hit people is when AI starts being baked into the business applications that they use every day. So one example of that, Microsoft Copilot. So we're piloting and working with Microsoft Copilot. Yep. And it's interesting to see the things that it's starting to do and recommend as it gets to know our people better and our team members. So we're watching those things both for ourselves and for our clients. But I think just in terms of, the impact is going to be significant, because when you look at the things that a lot of knowledge workers do, a lot of those could be really assisted by these technologies. So we've talked about what the productivity impact is going to be. Is it going to be 5%? Is it going to be 10%? Well, we're hearing more and more, sort of anecdotal stories of, hey, our developers are now 40% more productive than they were before because they've automated, or they've now got a repository for this, and these tools are now suggesting different things. So, so I think that's going to pick up. The other thing you have to remember is that anytime, I've heard people, well, I used it, I didn't think it was that great. Well, you have to remember that today is the worst day ever that these tools are going to be. Tomorrow, they're going to be better. The day after that, they're going to be even better. And it's going to be exponential. And, specifically for the CPA profession, I think there's a ton of things that when people come into the profession, the first couple of years that they learn is a lot of repetitive, not so fun things that you do as a staff auditor or a tax associate. And when you look at a lot of those things, a lot of that can be automated. Yep. And so that's what we're looking at, because, at the end of the day, the CPA business is a relationship business, and we are about serving clients. And so that's really the focus. But there are a ton of tools and a ton of the ways these technologies can be used that can help us better serve clients and help us get to a better outcome. But that is going to change. One of the things you mentioned in your question is the billable hour. And I think when you look at, let's say your CPA did something and it took 10 hours. So they charged you, whatever amount. Now, when you look at, well, if the CPA uses the tools correctly, they can now do that in 4 hours or 5 hours. It's like, well, okay, so do we bill the client half of what we were billing before, even though we're creating the same amount of value? So I think for that reason, it's going to put a lot of pressure on the billable hour, because as firms get these tools, their professionals start using them, they're going to get more efficient. That doesn't change the value equation. It just changes if you use the billable hour method. So I think that's going to be one of the things that puts a lot of pressure on the profession, where the old way of sort of using the billable hour to approximate the value of what you're producing is going to shift, because that's been good for 100 years. Now, as you go forward, not so much, because the people that learn how to use the tools, just because they know how to use the tools, they're creating less value, therefore you should pay less. So that's going to be a fascinating thing to watch in the market over the next couple of years.
I was just going to say, to me, that's not only fascinating, to me, for the industry. I mean, I'm not a CPA, but that's exciting for the CPA world. I mean, to think that you can get more efficiency, produce more value, positively affect and make a bigger impact in clients' lives, all with more productivity and profitability. I mean, who's upset with that? Yeah, it's a win-win in my eyes.
Yeah, and it is what's one of those things. A lot of CPAs, sometimes they work hours. So you think about a 50-hour work week. Well, now what if you could get that same work done in 35 hours? How would you spend? Would you still use that 15 hours that you're saving? How would you use that? Would you use some of that for leisure? Would you use some of that for all the things? We all have the to-do list that we never have time to get to.
Mystery pile.
Yeah, we spend it on that. Or maybe, hey, now that I have time, I should really spend more time with my clients and get to know them better and understand that more, so that I can deliver more value. And I think that that opportunity is going to, present itself over the next couple of years as these tools really start to roll out and take effect.
Yeah, bottom line, it just creates choice, choice that didn't previously exist. So
Mm-hmm.
that's exciting. So speaking of change, I can speak from experience that post-pandemic, and it's hard to believe that it's March right now, right? So it's been almost, well, yeah, it's been 4 years, believe it or
Mm-hmm.
not, since the COVID pandemic began. But the business landscape has changed significantly. And again, I can speak from personal experience. The things we do, how we do them, we've changed a lot here behind the scenes. I think our clients would probably never notice most of those things, but what growth strategies, looking specifically at the CPA profession, what do CPAs need to be adopting now in order to thrive in this post-pandemic world?
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think about how to bucket this. And there's really two major areas of opportunity. One is with your basically your addressable clients. What are your markets? And the other is with your employees. So let's start with employees first. So basically in the old days, you basically had people that lived in your geographic area. And then basically within, probably 30 miles, they were willing to drive to your office and work there. And when the pandemic hit, I mean, we were already experimenting with remote work. But during the pandemic, obviously, everybody got thrust into remote work. Now we're seeing a little bit of retrenchment on the employee side where people are saying that remote work doesn't work, which is interesting to me because I think the reality is that probably those companies really don't know how to do remote work well. And so either they don't have the right employees who don't know how to work remotely, or their leadership, their managers don't know how to lead an organization that has remote employees. So I think from a CPA perspective, things to be thinking about is that's a huge opportunity to now get the talent you want anywhere in the country. And basically, you have access to the best and brightest anywhere. It's not just limited to what's near your area. And I think this is especially important in less populated areas. So we have some people on our teams that live in remote areas of New Mexico, and they wouldn't have the opportunity to work with us and serve the clients we do if we didn't embrace this remote workforce concept. And, so it creates lots of opportunities for them and for the firm because we get the best people. The other side is on the client side. So let's say you're a CPA, you're an individual practitioner, or you're a small firm, and you get a coffee shop as a client. And you serve that coffee shop and you learn it really well. You understand the ins and outs. What are my product costs? What are my marketing spend? How's that working? And then you're like, okay, I'm really good at coffee shops. In the old days, pre-2020, how many coffee shops could you serve? Well, there's probably 5 or 7 in my community in this area. So I can go after those 5 or 7. Well, now post-pandemic, you can, if you're the coffee shop expert, wherever you are, the coffee shops anywhere in the country or really in the world are going to seek you out because if that's your niche and you know that better than anybody else, they're going to come find you. And so your blog needs to be, the coffee CPA blog or the coffee profitability blog, and go to the coffee shop conventions, whatever those are, and then basically build your client base. You can now serve coffee shops anywhere in the world. So you went from a potential market of 5 to 7 to now what, 5 to 7 million?
Jeez, who knows?
I mean, yeah. And so it's fascinating. So I think the employee shift, sort of if you do it right, the opportunity that exists to find talent anywhere in the country. And then on the flip side, from a client service side, you now have an opportunity to serve clients anywhere if you do it correctly using all the tools and technologies that are available.
Is that one of the things you advise on when you're talking to CPA firms? Because I think that niching, and it's like a cliche, it's so scary, I think, to most owners of in multiple industries, by the way, not just the CPA world, our industry. But it works so well. It's just that transition that's so difficult and scary, and you think, if you think it's not going to work, and even if you try, you probably try it first, then you go back and you quit. What would you say about that? I mean,
Well,
dive a little deeper.
Yeah, it is a challenge because you're right, especially, and it's in a lot of professions, but especially in the CPA profession. Forever, we have been all things to all people. And you need help with something, I'll figure out a way to help you with it. So suddenly, when you go from that we're everything to everybody strategy to the niching down strategy, it's a huge shift. And it is very scary because before you're like, hey, I need all the work that I can get and I'll take it from anywhere. And I'm not turning anything down because I might be able to make $1 on it. Well, when you think about, well, I only do this and only for this segment of the market. And basically you just went from, serving anybody down to just this tiny sliver of the market. And so, yes, it is risky because you're now saying no to a lot of things you used to say yes to, but the potential there is fantastic for, the reasons that we just talked about. But you're right, it's a big shift. And I think with all of these things, it's really important that you think about your strategy. And this is the case not only with CPA firms, but a lot of small businesses too. You just get in a rut, you just keep doing what you're doing and you hope for the best. One of the things that we recommend, you got to step back and you got to think strategically about these types of questions. Do I want to niche down in a particular area because I really enjoy working with dental practices or with and that's what I'm really good at and that's what I'm passionate about? Or do you want to do the all things to all people model? And I think that's also the case with remote work and hybrid work as well, which is on a lot of these decisions, you have to be intentional. You have to think through, okay, this is who we are. Don't let sort of outside forces define who you are. Actually spend some time thinking about here's what we're really good at. Here's where we want to be in the future. And this is who we are. Then when that's the case, then you can make a plan and say, this is what we're going to do. The second part of course, is that you have to be disciplined about executing the plan. And that's really hard to do because we talk to a lot of, different, even our clients and everything. And sort of how's it going with remote work? Well, it was great. We had a plan, but then, we're not really doing that anymore. And we were going to have quarterly retreats and I was going to write a newsletter and we sort of stopped doing that.
I just
and
got
that
busy.
is,
I got too busy. Yeah.
And you get sucked into that whirlwind of just trying to, survive and do the things that your business needs, which is very, very common. But at the end of the day, if you're really going to pick something and that's what you want to grow and be, you have to stay focused. You have to set goals. You have to have discipline around this is the outcome that we're going to get. These are the steps that we're going to take to get there. And we've got to stay disciplined and somebody's got to hold you accountable, whether that's internally or you're holding others accountable or whether it's a Vistage group or whatever. But somehow you need to have other people help you keep your eyes on the prize.
Yeah, we have a consultant on retainer that we pay. I very much believe, I've had 5 in my 22-year career, and I very much believe in having somebody like a silent partner, essentially. That's what a consultant is. It's somebody who is part of your business but isn't part of your business, right? That can, punch you in the mouth and give you a hug and, tell you the things you need to hear, even though technically, they don't have to deal with the divorce and disagreements that a real partner would be. And, the other thing about niches I just wanted to comment on, just because I think that in the consultancy world, you have this, I don't know if it's just consultants in general, but when they talk about niching, what I've always heard is pick something super, super, specific, drill down and do that. And that's it. And I don't believe that you have to do that. I think that what might make it a little less scarier, like what we did, is we've been in business for almost 23 years and we have 2 niches. We work with business owners, growth-minded business owners who are excited about growing, who have interest in selling their companies someday. And then we work with career professionals. So your SVP, VP, D-suite, C-suite executives. And we can do both at the same time. And I think the other myth is that if you do that, that means that if you're not going to have, I don't know, in our profession, say a teacher isn't going to want to work with us. Well, that's not true. You're going to get referrals for teachers and you're going to get referrals for dentists. And you don't have to turn them away. You don't have to say, no, we don't work with dentists, So, I mean, wouldn't you agree that's the case, that you don't have to be so rigid?
Yeah, I think you can, when you look at that, and part of it is also directional in terms of right now our client base is across 10 different industries. But in the future, man, we're really good at coffee shops. And therefore, we're going to focus our marketing efforts to attract new coffee shops. But at the end of the day, if I get a teacher, if I get whatever other types of businesses, I'll still deal with them because I deliver significant value. But my future vision is I want to be the firm that's known for dealing with coffee shops. Now, that could be a 3, 5, 7, 10-year journey to get there. And it's mostly, how are we going to organize our marketing efforts? Where are we going to present at conferences? What's our thought leadership going to be focused on? Kind of all of those things need to be baked in the strategy. But even at Anders, we have multiple disciplines and we have different service lines that excel at different things. And we'll have, so in our virtual CFO practice, we've got, we help small to mid-sized law firms as their virtual CFO. Transportation, we've got a niche in that. We even have cannabis. We've got expertise specifically in cannabis in our virtual CFO practice.
That's
so
growing.
It's hard. It's challenging to manage because you are sending messages that may not be relevant for all of your audience. So you've got to figure that out. And I think that's where email marketing, starts to come into play, where you can specifically target people with things that they're interested in, and they know that they're interested in. So you create the content to match that. So I think there's a lot of different ways to go about it. But I think you're right. There is some flexibility. When you think about, well, I want to be the coffee shop expert, but only the ones that serve chai latte on Tuesdays. It's like you can take it too far. And I think there is a lot more flexibility in that. And once again, you have to spend some time thinking about what's right for me. What is it that me and my team, my firm, what are we passionate about? Where do we deliver the most value? Where do we hear the best feedback from clients? And how do we make sure that that's where we're headed? And that's the investments that we're making, and everybody's pulling in the same direction to go there.
I think that's brilliant. And I'm glad you say that. And I'm not a consultant for anybody, but I think that makes a lot of sense. So don't focus so much on reinventing your practice and kicking everybody out, but start your new marketing efforts and allow yourself to grow as time goes on. Let's take a step back real quick, because earlier I think you touched on to a certain extent advisory services, and they seem to be playing an increasingly pivotal role in CPA firms today, is what I'm hearing from you. Can you expand on that? How do you perceive the impact on the future or trajectory of firms, CPA firms, specifically as it pertains to advisory?
Yeah, and I do think advisory services are going to become a bigger part of firms' revenue going forward. And part of that is because a lot of the audit and tax business, the tools that are coming out should be able to help automate those businesses in those areas. So in theory, if we can get more done in less time, and depending on market pressures, then maybe the growth rates in audit and tax won't be as significant, as what we're hearing from clients is really this push for these value-added services that positively impact the outcomes of the business. And that's the umbrella that is advisory services, which are what are the things that we can do that are difficult than audit and tax, or the things that you would think of historically as CPA firm, but things that can really add value to my business. So just to give you a couple of examples of within our business, probably the two biggest areas of our advisory practice. The first is our virtual CFO practice, which is really, the sweet spot for that is really, say, companies between 3 and 20 million in annual revenue. And a lot of times, if they're not a financial oriented company, so like we've got a great niche in the digital agency space. And a lot of those folks, they're really great at what they do, but they're generally not financial people. Right. So the fact that you have a virtual CFO so all the bookkeeping, kind of all of the things behind the scenes are happening, but also the virtual CFO works with the team to prepare a cash flow forecast, so that you, instead of just looking at the bank statements and hoping you've got enough money in the bank, you actually have somebody who's saying, hey, by the way, if you're going to open that new location, and if you're going to do this push in the summer, that means you're going to need to invest in inventory. So in May, we've got a cash crunch we need to talk about. How are we going to deal with that? That's the kind of thing that a virtual CFO brings to the table, that a lot of times you don't have those conversations, and it is just sort of fingers crossed, hoping everything works out in the end. So our virtual CFO practice delivers a ton of value for clients in that area. The other major piece is really our technology practice. And Anders, as a firm, has been entrepreneurial for decades. Our technology practice actually has its roots in the 1980s. And when you look at where we're at today, a lot of what we do, sort of the concept that a lot of small businesses just, okay, well, I got accounting that needs to be done, I'm going to hire an accountant. Or I got to run this technology, so I'm going to hire a technology guy. Well, what happens? Well, especially in the post-pandemic crunch, everybody turned. So you'd have somebody, your IT guy would be there for a year, and then that person would leave. Then you'd spend 6 months recruiting. You'd get somebody new to come in. That person lasts 9 months, and you're in this constant churn. And we have more and more clients reaching out to us saying, that is broken. Can't you guys just handle this for me? And that's a lot of what we do through the virtual CFO practice and our technology practice. We outsource or co-source technology for small to mid-sized companies. So that's everything from managed services to sort of running, but it's also a lot of advancing the business, and especially in the Microsoft suite, for us to help push businesses forward and to improve their maturity around technology through the efforts of our team. So those are the types of services that clients are looking to us more and more for, because they know, number one, they trust us, which is a huge asset of the CPA profession. People just know that if you're dealing with a CPA firm, you're going to be treated fairly, and you're going to be treated with respect, and even, fiduciary levels of responsibility. And so But when you think about that, it's like from a business standpoint, they just have to, there's so many challenges in business today that they can't keep it all straight. And so if they trust their CPA, they'll look to them for these other types of services. And that's what we're seeing more of, which is, I know your firm, I know you're trustworthy. Help me with this too. Help me with this too. And I think that's the opportunity. That's one of the opportunities for the CPA profession really over the next decade.
Makes sense. I mean, it's not, to me, it seems like it's not only adding more value that the client needs, but it's also, I think for a lot of CPAs, it's going to be a whole lot more fun and exciting. And you got different stuff going on every day. You're having more fun than just doing the regular everyday, rigmarole. Something else I want to go back to that you touched on, because I feel like we've been talking about a lot of different things kind of all at once here, is that remote work model. We had a funny thing happen here where right before the pandemic, we had one of our anchor staff need to move, and it was terrifying. I thought, how in the world is this going to work? Then COVID hit literally 4 months later, and it was totally normal. And at the end, it ended up working out perfectly. Things are great. But I'm surprised to hear that there are companies, specifically in the CPA profession, that are maybe questioning whether or not remote work works that well. So in your view, I guess, why do you think these models are here to stay? And how should CPA firms adapt to this new normal? And maybe even throw in a couple tips on how to do it.
Yeah, and I think most of the negativity I think I'm hearing about remote work is mostly coming from CEOs of public companies, because they'll mention in their remarks and those types of things, we're forcing people to come back to the office, and we want people to be able to collaborate, and that only happens in person. And so that's a lot of what I see in the media in terms of where things are at. But there are firms that struggle with remote work and hybrid work. And I do think those models are here to stay, because primarily it's the same thing. If we look at our clients, we can develop all the services we want, but at the end of the day, what do our clients want? That's what they're going to buy from us. That's what they care about. Same thing with employees. And you ask employees what they want flexibility. They want choice. And that's the kind of thing that if you don't look at it that way, sure, you can force them to come back in the office, but how long are they going to stay your employee? And that's the crazy thing about both clients and employees is a choice. They can choose at any time that they want a different service provider or to stop getting that service from you. So there's a lot of options that are out there as it relates to that. But I do think with remote work, I think the opportunity is just too great. However, I will say that it's really hard. So for example, when you had that employee that moved away, and let's say, you can probably do it with one or two employees, but when you start having a significant percentage of your workforce that's completely remote and you have others that come in office, that's when it gets crazy complex. Mm-hmm. So I think if you just do remote and you have a remote company, I think you can set things up and that can go well. If at the other extreme, you're going to force everybody to physically be in the office, I think you can do that. And we've been doing that for hundreds of years. So that is a relatively easy model. Where I think it's the most challenging is the hybrid work. Because then you have some people that are, working completely remotely all day, and their needs are very different than someone that comes in the office 5 days a week. Or when you have other people that have a choice to come into the office and they choose to come or they don't, sort of whatever works best for their team. But that's when it gets complex, because then, and even at Anders, culture is a huge deal for us. So we want to make sure that when we have the opportunity to get people together in person, we take advantage of that opportunity. But how do you make sure that the remote employees don't feel slighted because they don't have an opportunity to come into the office and be part of those things? So there's all these nuances. Yeah. And if you don't set your culture and if you're not intentional about it, it's really difficult. So for example, I live in St. Louis. Our two major offices of Anders are in St. Louis. So I have the benefit of coming to an office. And, we have to be careful, because when we're in meetings and there's 8 of us in a room, in a conference room, and there's 3 people remote and they're hanging on the wall in the corner. And in theory, they're part of the meeting, but they're not really part of the meeting unless you actively manage that meeting. It's not going to be the same. So that's the kind of thing where it's like, okay, we need to call a timeout. Everybody needs to go back to their offices. You can have some social time in person, but then everybody needs to go back to their offices and do that meeting remotely so that everybody has even footing in the meeting. And that's hard to do. Same thing about retreats. If you have remote employees as part of your workforce, you to keep them engaged, what we found is that you need to get people together basically every 6 months. So we have two major
Okay.
retreats a year. Primarily, this is our virtual CFO practice. So two major retreats a year. We've got one coming up in late April in Las Vegas. So we're bringing of that 70-person team. We're going to bring that 70-person team together. And then we'll do it again in November to basically have all the remote employees have a chance to interact in person in the St. Louis office as well. So those are expensive, but we think to have a truly effective hybrid team, that's an investment that we need to make. So those
Yeah.
are the types of things as a business that I think you have to be intentional about. And then you have to recognize we have to manage things
Yeah.
differently than how we did in the past. And we've got to be disciplined about our execution on those things to make it a great experience for remote employees as well.
You just took the word out of my mouth. I was going to say it's back to being intentional again, and that's exactly right. Yeah. So I mean, based on your experiences, I mean, what are some ways? Like you mentioned that hybrid's the toughest. Going either way, the other direction, maybe a little easier. But what are some of the ways to create positivity and overcome hurdles that exist as a result of having that remote experience for employees? How do you overcome that? Maybe a couple tips for people who are dealing with that.
Yeah, I think the being intentional and being disciplined, I think that's really important, because if you're, especially most of the leadership at companies that are dealing with this issue are not remote. So they really don't understand the remote employee experience. So you've got to stay connected with your remote employees. You have to check in with them. You have to find out what's working. Is this the best place to work? And if not, tell me why. Help me understand, what could we do to make it better for remote employees? And I think that interaction is really important to have that, and I think for the remote employees to feel validated that they're important and that they matter, because a lot of times you have all this stuff that's going in the physical office, but the remote employees are like, hey, what about me? Am I not important? So you have to make sure that your communication, if you gather everybody physically together in the office to have a daily stand up, well, what about the remote employees? You have to be thinking about those types of things. So I think it goes back to being intentional and disciplined on that. The other thing is, and I'll comment more about, I talked about retreats. And, the interesting thing, one of the interesting things about our retreats is it's not like we bring people together and do, 4 days of training, 10 hours a day of training. That can probably be done mostly remotely. What's most important about when we get people together are relationships. And so we spend a lot of times, we put the group together in small groups to go out to dinner together on these retreats. And then we do a lot of things to mix people up, because what we find is that, at the end of the day, people want to have relationships with the people they work with. And if you're 100,000, 10,000 person firm, you can get lost in the shuffle. So figuring out how do you make big organizations feel small is also one of the key things of remote work. So when you think about that person probably works with and interacts with on a daily basis, maybe 6 core people. And if that person feels really connected and feels that those 6 are friends, then the likelihood of that person being engaged and staying with the company goes up dramatically. And that's where we invest a lot of time. So there's a lot of times that people spend socializing. There's when we actually start the meetings later in the day, because we encourage people to go out, spend time together after dinner, having a drink, catching up, because that's really important for people to feel connected with one another. So those are a couple of the small things to be thinking about as it relates to remote work and remote employees, because I do think this will become a differentiator. If your organization does remote work and does it well, you're going to become a magnet for remote talent. And I think what happened, a lot of people maybe wanted to get lost, and they were able to get lost after the pandemic in large organizations. So you had people that were remote workers that weren't necessarily good remote workers. And I think over time, what's happening is that people are selecting either to go back to an office or to work remotely. And I think if you create an environment that those people, that's what they want to do is remote work, then you become a destination for talent. And that can become a huge differentiator for your organization going forward.
Yeah, I think that I was just going to say that if you're not doing remote work, then you probably need to at least be open to it. And then if you're doing it and you're not being intentional about it, somebody else probably is. And it might be hard to retain talent, let alone attract new talent. And then the retreat idea, I just love that. I think that more than anything, humans are social beings. And when you start feeling left out, you start feeling like you're forgotten on, like you're forgotten about, like you're on an island at home. That can get maybe a little depressing from time to time, seeing the same walls all the time. So having those retreats, getting together with other people, I think it can make, the virtual meetings that much more exciting when you've had these conversations, you've got relationships and maybe even inside jokes that you've had over dinner. That's a great
Yep.
idea.
Yeah. And another thing I'll add is that in addition to the sort of every 6 months retreats, we also, our virtual CFO practice, every Monday for a half hour, there is a meeting and it's required attendance from all team members. And it's basically for socialization. So there's a topic of the week, there's a joke of the week, there's, different things that we do. And it's really focused on socialization because otherwise a lot of those folks may not get an opportunity to have that. So you have to look at how you spend your time differently. The other thing that I think is key is I start meetings differently now than I did before. So before I was more of okay, we got 45 minutes, let's get this done. Now I'm more of I'm going to spend the first 5 minutes. Hey, I know you went on vacation last week. Where'd you go? How was it? Has anybody else been there? Oh, okay. And I know you had this going on. Talk to me about that. And I do that in front of the group so that everybody gets to know everybody else that's in the group. And because otherwise, I mean, a lot of the things that used to happen in a physical office where you just bump into somebody or pop into somebody's office, that is really hard to do in a virtual world. And so as a result of that, if you're not intentional about creating those opportunities, you are going to suddenly my remote employees aren't sticking with me. It seems like I churn them every 9 months. Like, well, that's probably because you haven't set up your environment to where it really fits what a remote worker needs. So that would be a couple of things and recommendations that I'd have for your listeners.
All right. And then just as we wrap things up here, could you share maybe I don't know, this might be tough, so I'm putting you on the spot, but what would be your most valuable piece of advice if somebody put a gun to your head and it had to be one piece of advice for CPAs who are looking to navigate and succeed in what seems to me to be an extremely fast changing and evolving landscape that is the accounting profession? What would that one piece of advice be?
So it'd probably be a combination of a couple of messages together, but it's all about preparing for change. And so how do you do that? And I think part of that is you've got to get educated on what's happening. So and there's no better way to do that than by experimenting and using these tools yourself. So if you're sitting there and you're a CPA firm owner or really any executive, and you've read it in the Wall Street Journal, this is coming, but you haven't started to play around with it yourself, I highly encourage you to start doing that. Start experimenting. And it's also really hard because most of the people that are in leadership I've been working for decades. I'm not going to admit that I don't understand these tools that are coming out. So I'm just going to ignore it. Yep. And I think at the end of the day, though, the executives that say, hey, I'm not good at this, but I've got these folks that just came out of college that learned Python, that learned Power BI, that learned all these things. The smart executives are going to be the ones that tap into that and say, hey, can you help get me up to speed on this topic? Because I don't even know where to start. And that's the kind of thing where suddenly as an executive, if you're recognizing the talents of your employees and you're asking them to be part of the solution, that can pull everything forward. So I think the sort of acknowledging this change is coming and then start taking action to actually address this. A lot of it through experimentation, but also around strategy. You got to decide as this thing evolves, what do you want to be? Do you want to be on the leading edge? Are you going to be a fast follower? Or are you basically going to keep doing what you're doing until it doesn't make sense anymore? And, different strategies for different firms, for different companies. But I think you have to be intentional and then obviously disciplined about the execution.
I took some great notes here. Leave your ego at the door, right? Empower your younger professionals. Mm-hmm. That's great. And I think they're just begging to make a difference and make an impact. I mean, that's what I hear all the time from younger people. But all right, well, that's all the time we have for our show today. David, thank you so much. This has been awesome.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate it.
If you'd like to get a hold of David, you can message him on LinkedIn. You can also get a hold of him at AndersCPA.com. That's ANDERSCPA.com. You can also check out, he's got a really cool podcast called But Who's Counting, which I love that name, by the way. The podcast is available on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify. So check that out and subscribe there. You'll also find all the links to his contact information in our show notes below on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And as I always say, there are no shortage of podcasts out there. There's thousands of them. And you chose to give ours a listen today. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us on the Elevate Your Business podcast. To complete our free business valuation quiz, to check out additional articles, webinars, videos, and other educational resources, or to set up an intro call with your host, Adam Koch, just head over to elevateandexit.com. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for financial advice. None of our shows engage in rendering legal, financial, tax, or other professional services. Always talk to a professional business transition planning consultant or certified exit planning advisor before implementing any of the ideas shared in this episode.